Welcome to UBI Unplugged, breaking down the future of income. Glad to have you both here today.
Thanks for having me. Always ready to unpack these big ideas. Whether they're going to hold water or not is another question.
Happy to be here. Looking forward to a robust discussion, especially given the interesting economic climate we're in.
Exactly, and that's a perfect segue into what I wanted to discuss. A few articles have caught my eye, painting a picture of economic anxieties and some, let's say, questionable policy responses. I'm thinking specifically about this Vox piece on regretful Trump voters. The ABC News report about inflation supposedly easing after Trump's Liberation Day tariffs, which, come on, the name alone. And then this LA Times article talking about the dysfunction of Congress and its impact on, well, everything.
Right, I saw that Vox piece too. The whole regretful Trump voter thing. I mean, are we really surprised? People latch onto promises, things don't magically get better, and then they're shocked. Color me cynical, but it's the same old story.
Cynicism aside, I think it highlights a really important point about economic vulnerability. These voters, they weren't necessarily diehard ideological supporters. They were looking for economic relief, and when they didn't get it, they felt betrayed. It's not necessarily about Trump specifically, but about the failure of current systems to address their needs.
Precisely. And that's where UBI comes in, at least in my view. If these voters had a guaranteed income, a basic safety net, would they be so easily swayed by, frankly, often empty promises? Would they feel so desperate that they turn to, well, policies that ultimately hurt them?
Hold on. UBI as the magic bullet again. People feel betrayed, so we just give them money. Where's that money coming from? And what's stopping them from feeling betrayed when the UBI isn't enough to solve all their problems? Or when it causes inflation and their UBI is worth less? It just feels like kicking the can down the road.
Otto raises a valid point. The funding mechanism is crucial. We can't just print money. That's a recipe for disaster. We need to be talking about progressive taxation, closing loopholes, and potentially even restructuring our entire economic system to prioritize human well-being over endless growth. And yes, we absolutely have to think about inflationary pressures.
Okay, yes. And it's not about a magic bullet, absolutely. It's about creating a foundation that allows people to weather economic storms, to invest in themselves, to start businesses, to be less vulnerable to these political swings. We're talking about long-term societal benefits, not a quick fix.
I still think we're oversimplifying things. Take this Liberation Day tariff thing. Inflation supposedly eased? That's what the article says. But economists are saying it'll probably go up in a few months once the shelves are stocked with the tariffed goods. Is UBI going to solve that? What if these tariffs cause job losses? What if businesses close down? Is UBI just supposed to catch everyone when the whole thing collapses?
Well, and there is that. The tariff situation is a great example of a poorly thought out policy creating more problems than it solves. It shows how easily global supply chains can be disrupted and how vulnerable we are to geopolitical instability. We need diversification, we need regionalization, we need resilience, and UBI can potentially play a role in that by supporting local economies.
Exactly. Imagine a scenario where UBI allows people to leave these precarious, globalized supply chain jobs. They can then invest in local agriculture, renewable energy, or other sectors that are more resilient to global shocks. It promotes regional self-sufficiency, reducing our dependence on these fragile international systems.
Okay, but let's be realistic. Are people really going to leave their jobs and become farmers? Most people don't want to work anyway. And are we sure we want more farmers? We already have huge agricultural corporations dominating the market. Is UBI just going to subsidize inefficient small farms that can't compete?
That's where careful policy design comes in. We're not just handing out money and hoping for the best. We need to think about how UBI interacts with existing agricultural policies, how it can support sustainable farming practices, and how it can empower local communities to control their own food systems. Perhaps it is not small farms, but small businesses we should be focusing on.
And it's not just about farming. It's about allowing people to pursue education, to start small businesses that address local needs, to participate more fully in their communities. It's about unleashing human potential that's currently stifled by economic insecurity.
I don't know about that. What about the LA Times piece about Congress being dysfunctional? That seems like a bigger problem. If Congress can't even pass a budget, how are they going to manage a UBI program? It seems like we're trying to build a house on a foundation of sand.
That's a fair point, and it underscores the need for serious political reform. We need to address the gridlock, the corruption, and the influence of money in politics. But I think UBI could actually help address that dysfunction, ironically. By reducing economic inequality, it might lessen the power of special interests and create a more level playing field.
Exactly. Think about it, less economic desperation, less reliance on corporate jobs, more empowered citizens demanding accountability from their representatives. It could be a virtuous cycle driving political reform from the bottom up.
That's optimistic, maybe even naive. People are greedy. Power corrupts. I just don't see how UBI magically fixes those fundamental human problems.
It doesn't magically fix them, no, but it addresses a critical underlying factor, economic insecurity. And addressing that can have ripple effects, empowering people to be more engaged, more informed, and less susceptible to manipulation.
Think about the long-term implications for our supply chains. Right now, we're incentivizing companies to exploit cheap labor and externalize environmental costs. UBI could create a floor, a minimum standard of living that makes it harder for companies to get away with those practices. It could incentivize them to prioritize ethical and sustainable production.
And where does this stuff come from? What countries are we going to be exploiting for cheap labor instead?
It could incentivize companies to prioritize ethical and sustainable production at a cost to the consumer. Are the average consumer going to take that on? The ethical side of the UBI argument is idealistic at best.
Okay, but let's be honest. A UBI high enough to provide that floor, it is idealistic at best. It would have to be enormous, and the country could collapse, trying to pay for it.
But consider this, the cost of not implementing UBI, the cost of poverty, crime, healthcare, lost productivity, and the constant cycle of economic instability. It's a huge cost, and we're already paying it. UBI is not about adding to that cost, but about reallocating resources more effectively.
It's also about investing in human capital. Studies have shown that UBI can improve health outcomes, reduce crime rates, and boost educational attainment. Those are all long-term investments that pay dividends down the road.
All right. But what about the disincentive to work? People are just going to sit around and do nothing.
That's a common concern, but the evidence suggests otherwise. Studies have shown that UBI doesn't lead to widespread work abandonment. People still want to work, to contribute, to achieve something. UBI simply gives them the freedom to choose what kind of work they do and to negotiate better wages and working conditions.
And it frees people up to do unpaid work that's essential to society, like caregiving, volunteering, and community organizing. Those are all valuable contributions that are currently undervalued and undersupported.
Volunteering, okay, but who's going to take care of my grandma if everyone's off volunteering?
That's a great point and highlights the need for a holistic approach. We need to be investing in childcare, elder care, and other support services alongside UBI. It's about creating a comprehensive social safety net that meets people's needs at every stage of life.
And it's about recognizing the value of care work, compensating caregivers fairly, and ensuring that everyone has access to quality care, regardless of their income. That's not just a UBI issue, but it becomes even more critical in a UBI context.
So, more taxes, more government programs, more bureaucracy. Sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It doesn't have to be more bureaucracy. In fact, UBI could actually simplify our welfare system, streamline administration, and reduce fraud. Instead of a patchwork of overlapping programs with complex eligibility requirements, we could have a single universal payment that goes to everyone.
That's the ideal, but the devil's always in the details. We need to think carefully about how UBI interacts with existing programs, how to avoid unintended consequences, and how to ensure that the transition is smooth and equitable.
And who's in charge of all this? Is there a single person who's responsible for the success or failure of such a massive program? Or will this fall to a committee that can always point fingers elsewhere?
Good question. Governance is crucial. We need strong oversight, transparency, and accountability. Perhaps an independent agency, insulated from political interference, could be responsible for administering the program and evaluating its effectiveness.
And we need to be constantly monitoring the data, tracking key indicators, and making adjustments as needed. This isn't a set it and forget it policy. It's an ongoing experiment that requires continuous learning and adaptation.
Experiment? With the entire economy? That sounds terrifying.
Well, we're already experimenting with the economy constantly through tax cuts, deregulation, and other policies. The question is whether we're experimenting in a way that benefits everyone or just a select few. UBI is about shifting the focus to people, to human well-being, and to a more equitable and sustainable future.
It really comes down to priorities. Do we prioritize endless economic growth, or do we prioritize human dignity and social well-being? Do we prioritize short-term profits or long-term sustainability? Those are the fundamental questions we need to be asking ourselves.
I still have a lot of doubts, but I will admit, something has to change. The way things are going, with rising inequality, climate change, and political instability, it's not sustainable.
And that's the point. UBI is not a perfect solution, but it's a potential pathway towards a more just and resilient future, a future where everyone has the opportunity to thrive, regardless of their background or circumstances. But it has to work hand in hand with other reforms and regulations.
It's a complex challenge, but it's one worth exploring. We need to be having these conversations, engaging in critical analysis, and developing innovative solutions. The future of our economy and our society depends on it.
Well said. I think that's a great place to wrap things up for today. Thanks to both of you for a really stimulating and thought-provoking discussion. It's clear there's no easy answer, but hopefully we've shed some light on the potential of UBI and the challenges we face in building a more resilient and equitable future. Thanks for tuning in to UBI Unplugged.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Still not convinced, but definitely giving me something to think about.
Likewise, always good to engage in these critical conversations. Until next time.
Before we close, though, could you explain the part about the state and local law enforcement and immigration enforcement, as seen in Tennessee, raises profound questions about the efficacy and ethics of such strategies?
Sure, it's about resources and community relations. Are the local cops focusing on actual crimes, or are they being used to enforce federal immigration laws? Because the latter breeds distrust between the police and the immigrant community. If people are afraid to report crimes or cooperate with investigations because they fear deportation, that makes everyone less safe.
And it ties back to economic security. If people are living in constant fear of deportation, they're less likely to invest in their communities, start businesses, or participate in the economy. A UBI could provide a buffer, some stability, even in that environment, but it's a band-aid on a deeper wound. The fundamental issue is the targeting of vulnerable populations.
Right? And as someone who doesn't know the numbers, how would a UBI program be designed to specifically address the economic vulnerability of immigrants in targeted cities, while considering potential conflicts with existing social safety nets?
That's a tricky one, because eligibility for social safety nets often depends on immigration status. A UBI could potentially fill the gaps for those who are ineligible for other programs, providing a baseline level of support. But we need to be careful not to create perverse incentives or duplicate benefits. The goal is to supplement, not supplant, existing programs.
And to ensure that the UBI is accessible to everyone, regardless of their immigration status. That means simplifying the application process, providing language assistance, and addressing any potential barriers to access. It also means protecting recipients from discrimination and exploitation.
But what if the UBI becomes a target for those sweeps? Wouldn't that just make people even more vulnerable? If ICE knows everyone is getting this income, they might see it as a resource to seize or garnish.
That's a real concern. We need to build in legal protections to shield the UBI from seizure or garnishment and to ensure that recipients are not penalized for receiving it. We'd also need to provide legal assistance to those who are facing deportation or other immigration-related challenges.
Absolutely. The UBI is not a silver bullet. It's part of a broader strategy to create a more just and equitable society. That includes immigration reform, criminal justice reform, and a commitment to protecting the rights and dignity of all people.
Okay, that makes more sense. So just to make it more clear, the reported disproportionate impact of these immigration sweeps on communities of color in Nashville underscores the urgent need for more nuanced and equitable economic safety nets, particularly in areas with large immigrant populations. A universal basic income UBI program could help stabilize these communities, mitigating the fear and instability caused by these raids, and providing a platform for long-term economic advancement. I think I understand the concept better now.
Exactly. The sweeps create economic chaos. Fear prevents people from working, sending kids to school, reporting crimes. The community destabilizes. A UBI offers a small, but crucial, counterweight to that, letting people maintain some level of normalcy and self-sufficiency.
And to be clear, it is not just about economic advancement, but about the erosion of fundamental civil liberties and the potential for systematic targeting of marginalized communities. A UBI can act as an economic and societal safety net during those periods of uncertainty. But as we've both agreed, it's a tool, not a cure. A tool we have to implement thoughtfully.
I think I understand the concepts better now. Thanks again for clearing my views on this matter.
My pleasure. It's by asking these tough questions that a solution can be discussed.
No problem at all. We are glad to have you here and have your opinions about the UBI and the future of global supply chain diversification. It's by asking these tough questions that a solution can be discussed.